Well, welcome everyone. We're here today at the 2022 Open Education Conference to talk a bit about a new project that we've launched at Creative Commons and with our partners Spark and Eiffel. First, maybe just some quick introductions. Monica, would you like to lead us off?
Thanks, Cable. Hi, everyone. My name is Monica Granados. I am the Open Climate Campaign Manager at Creative Commons.
And my name is Cable Green. I'm the Director of Open Knowledge at Creative Commons. I oversee our work in open education, in open science, and in open access research. And I see a lot of faces or names that I know. Welcome, everybody. Hello, old friends. And I see some new people. So thanks for coming. It's always a great conference, and we're thrilled to be here today. Let me go ahead and put some slides up. I should say Monica and I will go through some slides. We're going to share those slides with you in the chat at the end, and we'll also put them up on the website for this session, so everybody can access them later. The recording will be available, so if you no need to take any notes. And we'll share some resources in the chat as we're going through as well. We're going to tag team this presentation. Monica, please interrupt me if I'm missing anything, and we'll our goal is to get through the slides fairly quickly so that we can leave some time at the end for discussion. So with that, let me go ahead and share. And Monica, I'll ask you, does that look okay?
Looks perfect, Cable.
Okay. Wonderful. So as mentioned, we're here to talk about the Open Climate Campaign. We're going to go through a bit of a kind of a history, how we got here, the thought process for getting here, a few of the events that happened, and then we'll dive into the campaign itself, talk about it, and talk about how you can get involved. So this really started back around 2015 when the United Nations moved from the Millennial Development Goals to the current Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs as they're known. And at Creative Commons, we were really asking, as we were looking at these, what are the world's greatest problems? What are the biggest challenges in the world? And as we thought about what those might be, the SDGs seemed as good of a list as any. And most important, these are the world's biggest challenges as defined by the governments around the world, and there was unanimous support in the United Nations General Assembly to work on these collectively, and that this is really designed to be a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for everyone. You'll see some really critical, if you're not familiar with the SDGs, take a look. Maybe somebody could share a link in the chat. You'll see things like SDG 4, education for all. You'll see an SDG about clean water. There's one about climate change. There's one about life below water, sustainable cities, gender equality. It just goes on and on. There's big challenges, as we all know, that we face. And this is a list and a set of actions and coordinated actions globally around how to work on these challenges. So right about that time, I was at Creative Commons, the Director of Open Education. And so we really started asking, well, what role, if any, does open education have to play in these sustainable development goals? And we started talking about and working on several of these. One was that open educational resources can be the resources to teach the public about the SDGs. So if part of solving the big global challenges that are the Sustainable Development Goals is understanding them and knowing about them and raising awareness about them, then certainly the educational resources and campaign materials and everything else could be openly licensed and freely shared and translated into lots of languages, et cetera. And so that one seemed fairly obvious. Another thing that seemed obvious is, given that OER are openly licensed and the SDGs are constantly evolving and changing, and actions under them are being updated, that OER can also be updated in real time about the SDGs. We started working with the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. This is the group that runs the SDG Academy. Maybe somebody could put in the link for the SDG Academy. And they started doing this. They built at first free materials. We then worked with them to make those open materials about the SDGs, and those are used all over the world. We got into some conversations with governments about thinking about the relationship between governments and public education systems in a new, and I would say more positive way. For those of you that track public investment in education, this is not true in every country, but in many countries around the world over the past 4 or 5 decades, there's been a systematic withdrawal or downsizing of public investment in public education systems. Again, that's not true in all countries, but that has been a trend that we've seen in many countries. Certainly that's true in my country, in the United States. And one thing we started talking about is that if education, if colleges, universities start to work on solving SDGs, does that form a new positive relationship between governments and their public education systems? So we started some interesting conversations there as well. My background, my doctorate's in education psychology, and one of the things that we talk about is how you design learning spaces so that they are interesting, motivating to students. And one of those properties is that students are learning in contexts where the problems are authentic and meaningful to them. And so there were some early experiments at Montgomery College and others where they started to create rather than teach about, say, chemistry, for example, they started to teach about clean water as the main topic, with chemistry being something that they learned in order to work on the clean water SDG. And so the idea was that if we start to think about educational resources and curriculum design around these big, complex, real, authentic problems, that may provide a different type of way to approach subjects. And arguably, possibly this could be more motivating for students. The learning might be what the Hewlett Foundation likes to call deeper learning. And students who are able to actually contribute to solving the SDGs or contribute to the common good, that might be viewed as positive by them. There were some conversations back from in the Obama administration here in the United States about at the Office of Science, Technology, and Policy, or OSTP, about what would it look like to have OER-based degree programs about the SDGs. So instead of getting a major in chemistry, what if you got a major in, say, clean water and a minor in chemistry or biology, et cetera? So there was all these conversations swirling around what role might open have to play with the SDGs. Fast forward a few years, Creative Commons was up at the University of Alaska. We got asked to go talk about open education and talk about open access research and help them with some open policies. And while we were doing all that, the climate change kept coming up. No big surprise. Alaska is a member of the Arctic Council. Alaska sits right at a point where climate change is very noticeable. Their glaciers are melting fast. We were in Anchorage. The buildings in Anchorage were already starting to tip because the permafrost was melting and the foundations were sinking. And so climate change was on the tip of everybody's tongues. We had a conversation about what it would look like for the University of Alaska system, Fairbanks and Anchorage, to host what we called an Institute for Open Climate. And the idea was that they would maybe host an annual conference. They would be a referatory for OER about climate change. They would be a referatory about open access research on climate change. And so we talked about this. People got very excited. We went a couple of rounds with funders, and then the whole thing kind of fell apart. There was a change in leadership, interest waned, and we moved on. So this didn't happen, but the idea was started. And everybody was intrigued, including some of the funders in the space. And so we started to dive into this a little bit more and said, well, if we look at the SDGs, and if we had to pick one that we think is maybe the most urgent right now, climate change and the resulting harm to our global biodiversity is probably a pretty good one to start with. We we started to look at, well, how much of the educational resources, how much of the research is open and how much is closed. And no big surprise, we found that with climate change research that open was not the default. It was getting better. So as you can see in this chart, roughly 43% of the research articles that were published around climate were open, but still a majority were closed. And so there was some work to be done. You heard Monica talk about this in her keynote the other day. Creative Commons is now 20 years old. We're having our 20th anniversary this year. And while we're really excited to look back and celebrate the successes over the past 2 decades, we're less interested in that. We're much more interested in looking forward and asking the question, what should Creative Commons be working on in the next 20 years and beyond? And one of the themes that we've latched onto is this idea that if we're going to solve the world's biggest problems, then the knowledge about those problems must be open. It sounds fairly obvious, but we want to be clear about it and build our programs and our actions around this core idea. And so when we say the knowledge, we certainly mean the educational resources. We also mean the academic and scientific research. We mean the research data. We mean other large data sets. We mean software, hardware, anything that can be opened that can lend itself to solving these United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We're interested in helping to lead efforts and campaigns to open up that knowledge. And so given that we had started these conversations about openness and SDGs, and then we kind of started to focus on climate, we pulled together a coalition. And it was a coalition of partners, Creative Commons, Spark, and Eiffel, and a coalition of funders, the Open Society Foundations and the Arcadia Fund. The net result of all this, I'll let Monica go into to more detail, is that we now have an open climate campaign that we have launched. It is funded for a full 4 years, and we have hired staff. So Monica has joined Creative Commons as our full-time open climate campaign manager. And there's a big chunk of my time in this, as well as other members of the CC staff and partners at Eiffel and Spark. So we're absolutely thrilled about this. And let me go ahead and turn it over to Monica, who will take us through some of the details of the campaign.
Thanks, Gable. So we are now, in the midst of this 4-year campaign. We launched at the end of August. And if we start from the top, the goal of the campaign is to promote open access to research to accelerate the progress towards solving the climate crisis and preserving global biodiversity. Now, this links to the previous slides that Gable was talking about, because we know that we need the knowledge about these problems to be open. If we open those up, we can understand the problem better and lead us to solving that problem. And the default right now is that it's not. So what do we have planned to help that problem? Go to the next slide. So we have set forth 11 goals to get us to the ultimate goal, which is to make the open sharing of research outputs the norm in climate science. So that will help us. We will work on that segment of the climate change problem to help us find solutions and tackle the climate crisis. So we've got 11 goals, and they sit in these 4 general categories. The first is information in and out. So we want to talk to people like you folks about the importance of this problem and the importance of climate change and biodiversity knowledge, and the need for that knowledge to be open. And although we want all knowledge to be open, we're focusing on this discipline, this segment of knowledge that humans are producing, because we are in the midst of a climate crisis. So we want to impart the need for this information, knowledge, research to be open. We also want to know a little bit more about where we are now in open access regarding climate change and biodiversity research. So we've got a little bit of a snapshot. You'll see that that was from up until 2020. So that data from the current Open Knowledge Initiative. But we want to get more information about how are we doing relative to COVID-19 research? How is that information and knowledge packed inside publications? How available is that relative to information about other global problems? We want to know a little bit more about why aren't we at a point where we've got open access to the knowledge about climate change and biodiversity research? What are the barriers? And how could we use the set of experts that are working with us at the Open Climate Campaign to help us leverage existing policy to also create then new policy under that existing policy to overcome barriers that have prevented us from having open sharing of research outputs being the norm. That is going to feed directly into what we have here is 4, 5, and 6, working hand in hand with funders of research. So we're sort of going after the people who are making decisions about what science, what research, what knowledge is going to be produced through funding, and working with them hand in hand to create open access policies to incentivize researchers to work in open, but also to publish openly. Again, we're going to be using information that we collect from point number 3, identifying legal and policy barriers. We know a lot about existing policies as well. We've got, as I said, we have quite a robust steering committee and developing working groups to get us more information about these problems and how we're going to get to policies that work, and then policies that can be implemented as well. So we want to make sure that we also provide training to the stakeholders to ensure that the policy doesn't just sit on a shelf. We're also looking for inclusion in international frameworks. So we want to make sure that this is an international campaign, that we're not just working with maybe the relationships that we already have as the three partners, Spark, Eiffel, and Creative Commons. We want to make sure that this has impact across the world. And so we're working with international organizations, and we're also just looking for more opportunities to work with international organizations that may be working on frameworks or guidance documents or policies that that are worked at the international level to ensure that open access is a concept that is being considered in the development of policies and frameworks that have to do with climate change and biodiversity research. We want to continue to talk to a greater audience. This sits under this information out. We want to secure endorsements. And then, we're talking about making this continuing to make this an international campaign, but not only working to get inclusion into international frameworks, but also to work with traditionally excluded voices in open knowledge. Open scholarship, open science in particular, has been very dominated by the global north, by North America and Europe. And there's been decisions in the revolutions that have happened in scholarly communication that have excluded low and middle income countries and have not allowed them to participate in open scholarship. And so we want to make sure that they have a seat at the table and that are influencing the policies and decisions that we are creating with our stakeholders, but also how that influences the progress of the campaign as well. And then the last part is, the 1 through 9 have really been looking at the future. So how are we going to change scholarly communication around climate change and biodiversity research moving into the future, but recognizing that the way that the science progresses is that it is built on previous research. We sort of slowly build one brick at a time on top of previous research. And so we have to also make sure that previous research is accessible. And so we'll be looking at opening past publications as well. So looking at putting together a corpus of foundational research, highly cited literature that gets cited in IPCC reports, and making sure that that is open. So using different methods available to us, including looking at depositing copies of articles into institutional repositories. And we're also going to be having conversations with publishers, who are a really important part of this conversation, to also, highlight the need, much like COVID-19, that climate change is it's an issue that will leave no one untouched, and that we need to address now. Climate change is not a temporary problem, and that we need to act from the scholarship space and do something to make this knowledge open. So on the next slide, talk about what you can do. And we want you to join us. We want you to join the Open Climate Campaign. That's why we're calling it a campaign, because it's something that we want people to become a part of. It's information out and information in. And we've got a lot of information for you. You can start by joining us through the website. So visiting the Open Climate Campaign website, we've got some action kits that spell out how to get involved in the Open Climate Campaign. You could connect us with groups who have climate change educational resources. That is a big part of the campaign. We're not just opening publications, but that's the first part of the discussion with our target groups. But we're also going to be talking about, if you're an environmental organization, you likely have educational resources that you produce as part of your mandate. Let us help you open those and make them easier to use, easier for them to be disseminated, easier for other people to build on top of the work that you have done. So if you have connections, we'd love to hear from you. So that we can work to specifically open up educational resources around climate change and biodiversity knowledge as well. And if you are someone who works at an institution that has knowledge producers who are doing research, you are probably that first line in introducing people to open scholarship and open practices. You can be that conduit. You can use the resources that we have on our website. You could reach out to us and we could connect you with even more resources. There's so many grassroots community efforts by publishers, by big name publishers as well, to help you get information about how you can help researchers work in the open. So we've got our information there. That's our Twitter handle, our website, and our email. Let us know if you have any questions later on or now. We'll be taking questions.
Great, thanks, Monica. As people are thinking about their questions, maybe one thing we didn't say is that again, as Creative Commons is thinking forward, we mean for this to be our first campaign about opening knowledge about some of the world's biggest challenges, but not our last. And so one of the things we'll be thinking hard about in the coming years is what's the next SDG or multiple SDGs that we want to open up knowledge about those as well. And we're excited that we've created a bit of a template here. We have proposal materials. We know how to persuade funders to come into this space. We've got some experience now building partnerships with, in this case, organizations we've never worked with before. Large environmental organizations around the world have partnered up with us. So we're really excited about this space in general, about taking open to a kind of a different level than we've operated in before. With that, the floor is open. I'm going to stop sharing. I already did. Who has a question? We've got plenty of time. You can ask your question in the chat if you'd like, or the Q&A. I don't know if people have mics or not. If you do, feel free to grab the microphone.
I've got a question. So in what I've found in researching topics related to Arctic and Northern studies is that one of the biggest struggles, regardless of whether the content is open or not, is that it's all different languages. Can you talk a little bit about how that is playing into the work that you're doing here, and how specifically like Creative Commons and open access can impact that, and like in more than a theoretical way?
Yeah, I'll jump in quick and then pass it to
Sure.
Monica. One of the very tactical reasons to open up materials with a Creative Commons license is then you've got the legal rights to make modifications to the work, including translating it. And so that's really important for obviously for educational resources, also for academic research. As Monica pointed out, the academic research space is disproportionately representative of the global North. It's also disproportionately representative in the English language, and so when something's openly licensed, we can modify it, we can translate it. So that's one. Monica, you want to jump in on some others?
Yeah, I was going to say it also just allows you to innovate around it. So not only, having open licenses on the publication itself, but even on like the infrastructure and having like open software licenses that help you more easily innovate around all this like open infrastructure and open products. So for example, there's a cool project called, and I'll pop it in the chat, called Pen Lingua. It's a plugin that you actually can add to, I think you even add it to like bioRxiv, where you could download the preprint and it will use Google Translate automatically to translate the preprint in the languages that are available by Google Translate. So because these preprints are CC BY license, you can use infrastructure that has been built around a bioRxiv. It just sort of allows for a lot more innovation. And there's just also sort of been, as people mentioned, that consideration in the campaign as well, knowing that we are still bounded by a limitation of resources, but we ensure that our action kits are available in English, French, and Spanish. They're currently being translated into Portuguese. Now, these are still colonial languages, but everything is CC BY. So if someone wants to translate them, they can. We also have set aside money in the campaign to do translations as well. So we do have there's the recognition, right, that science is very English dominated, very global North dominated, and unless we put those resources behind it, it's not going to change.
And Stephen, you didn't ask this precisely, but one of the things that jumped into my mind about the importance of open licensing on this type of knowledge is something that's commonly referred to as text and data mining in the research space. So if you think about I don't know, phase one of academic research was I get a journal, I read the article, I might quote it, I might cite it, et cetera. We're now at a point, and I would argue we've been there for a while, where the amount of knowledge that's available on any particular topic has quickly become more than any one human being can consume and read. And so the ability for us to use tools from simple computer search programs to pattern recognition to increasingly artificial intelligence, deep learning, and other algorithms to actually go out and search and analyze and look for patterns in and look for keywords in thousands, if not tens of thousands of articles or other knowledge, and then to create derivative works from that to provide analysis. Oftentimes those actions are implicating copyright. And if you don't have the legal rights to get into the content and extract and modify and recombine in new ways, then you're not able to do a lot of that work. And so a lot of times there's a confusion in the research space about, well, why do we need to openly license the research articles, or why does the data need to be in the public domain using CC0, so it's in the worldwide public domain? There are a lot of reasons for that, but that's one of the core reasons. We need to make sure that that the legal barriers are out of the way. And you heard Monica talk about that's part of our campaign, is to identify those legal and policy barriers so that we can help to clear them, so that scientists can do the work that they need to do. I saw there's other questions here. Joanna says, and if I missed somebody's above Joanna, maybe Monica, maybe you could look to see if there's any.
I think that's the first question.
That's the first.
Okay.
Yeah, what support can your campaign offer us to guide early stages of the project as we work with faculty to locate and publish existing data sets? Monica, you've done some work around thinking about different roles and stakeholders and what we can provide and what we can't provide. And you might even hint a little bit about some of our thinking around data sets.
Yeah, thanks, Cable. So at the onset of the campaign, again, just sort of thinking about what we're bounded by the 4 years and the funding that we've received, we're specifically right now looking at opening up or helping open up publications and then the data associated with those publications. But we do recognize that there is a lot of data that is out there that may not be associated with publications, data sets that are out there on, say, monitoring data, like that data that gets produced on a regular basis in really large sizes. That's all to say that we're also not the only people who are working on this problem. So we are not presently specifically resourced to open up data sets, although we're always thinking about what are other important elements of the campaign that we can bring in to get us to that ultimate goal of making climate change, making the open sharing of research around climate change the default. But there are so many other organizations that we can help connect you with as well. The Open Environmental Data Project is a good example, who's working at that intersection of climate and open, and specifically looking at data sets. We also have on our website, if you go to Open Climate Campaign /resources, you'll find a list of places where there are a list of repositories for data as well. So I think the other thing we really want to do at the Open Climate Campaign is that if we're not doing the work, we'll try to connect you with someone who is doing that work. And so that's kind of information that we'll also be pushing out through our newsletter. And so I encourage you to sign up to our newsletter, because part of what I really want to do with this campaign, obviously, is to get to our ultimate goal, but I also want to do it through connecting with other organizations that recognize that this is a problem and that are doing work. And so that together we can work to solve that problem of having access to climate change and biodiversity knowledge. So to summarize, Open Environmental Data Project, check out our website, sign up to our newsletter, and then if you still need more guidance, shoot us an email and we'll try to put you in touch with somebody.
That's a great point, Monica, about reaching out to partners. We're finding that we had an overwhelmingly positive response to the campaign, and also to this kind of really basic idea that if we want to solve the world's biggest problems, we need to open up knowledge about them. That's pulled us into working with NASA on their Year of Open Science. It's pulled us into working very closely with UNESCO and their recommendation on open science, which Creative Commons was one of the many authors of that. And so, everybody's thinking about climate. Every country in the world's worried about climate change. Everybody's working on it in one way or another. And so to try to do any of this alone is just silly. There's different expertise out there that are working on different niches of the problem. And part of our job is to not only to work with them, but for the campaign to actually highlight their work. So you'll see us doing a lot of that as well. I think Andrea had the next question. Any thoughts on how college students can get involved in the campaign, and we can encourage them to do this? That's a great question. From the beginning of the campaign planning, we've looked at student-led, or I should say youth-led groups around the world. And as you know, there are many. This is on our agenda. We're discussing this with our steering committee right now. And just to echo something Monica said, it's not currently in the campaign plan. We're not resourced to do it, but it is something that we're going to look into, and I think you're going to see us add another action kits for for youth, et cetera, because there's so much momentum, power, excitement, and energy in that space. And to be totally blunt, the youth of the world are inheriting this world, and they have more of a stake in this conversation than anybody else does. And so we would be remiss if we weren't actively involving them. I wish I could tell you, Andrea, that here's what your students can do today. We're not there yet in the campaign, but keep an eye on the campaign website and the newsletter, and we'll chat more about it. Yeah, more from Anna on students. Kurt says, I've asked the wonderful new client if they want to CC license their work. Great, thanks, Kurt. As always, if anybody in this particular space, if you see big repositories of research about climate, research data sets, degree programs around climate, or courses, textbooks, whatever it might be, any OER or open access research or data, or other knowledge, if you find some good stuff and it is closed and somebody needs help opening it up, that's an area where we can help. Creative Commons does that, and the campaign certainly does as well. So, shoot us an email. We're happy to help. And/or like Kurt's example, if somebody's already doing it, let us know, and we will we'll work to highlight their good work as well if they're openly licensing their stuff. Jonathan says, I wonder how you think about obstacles to your success. Thanks, Jonathan. Always bringing in the complexity. We appreciate it. And what do we hope to do about them? Many extraction industries seem to want to avoid openness. They might oppose this campaign. In OER, looking at the curve of textbooks prices, it's clear that the creation of OER and other work in the OER community impacted commercial interests. We certainly have, and proudly so. Is there something that you can do with climate science which would be an equivalent? That's a great question. Monica, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, my first thought is that, we did explicitly think about potential barriers and what we would do to mitigate them. Obviously, other barriers will come up. I mean, I think we go into this campaign. I think anyone that goes into a work around climate change knows that it's an uphill battle for many reasons. Some sort of driven by economic decisions, some driven by political reasons. So I think we sort of knew we were walking into a space that is not necessarily an easy solution, which is why we don't have open access to this knowledge. I mentioned this, I think, in my keynote, that I really took inspiration from like what happened with the banning of DDT. How much DDT was something that was liberally applied. If you didn't catch that, that it was widely used. The scientist who first used it for its ultimate application won a Nobel Prize. And what they found was that, once there was enough pressure from the public, the policymakers, made decisions that were in line with what people wanted. And so I think we just need to continue to open this knowledge so that we can allow people to understand the problem, and they could mobilize that knowledge to be able to catalyze change through policymakers.
I'll say just a little bit more about that, Jonathan. This shouldn't come to as a surprise to anybody. As Creative Commons does its work, one of the things that we do is we look for systems of knowledge and systems of culture that are structured in a way that are unjust, that are inequitable, that are inefficient, that those are the negative ways to say it. Let me say it in a more positive way. We look to create and our moderator's telling us that our time is up. I'll keep this very brief. What we're interested in is the opposite of that. We're interested in systems that are socially just, that are equitable, that everybody can access and contribute to. And when we look at the current status of scientific research, it is in many ways unjust, unequitable, and people are not able to, in many cases, access the knowledge, and in many cases, not able to even contribute to the knowledge because of things like article processing charges. And so I shared a link to around diamond open access. This may be a new concept to many in the open education space. This is the idea of diamond open access is that rather than a commercial journal, for example, hosting the publicly funded research that we've all paid for and then selling it back to us many times over, and or charging us article processing charges in order to even have the rights to contribute our publicly funded access and turn our copyright over to them, which all seems like a really terrible system, many would argue. Diamond Open Access says, let's not do that anymore. Let's have community-owned, academy-owned journals where the knowledge is still produced by people from all around the world. There are no article processing charges. So whether or not your article is published by one of these Diamond Open Access journals is based on the merit and the quality of the article, and is still peer reviewed by peers in your field. But there's no cost to submit. You are not required to turn your copyright over to the journal. So it's called rights retention. I keep my copyright. The journal would ask you to CC license it so that everybody can use it and text and data mine it, as we discussed before. And there's no subscription fees. So there's no fee to read these articles either. So what the commercial publishers are doing now, for the most part, is to either charge you on the subscription side, you got to pay to read, or charge you on the article processing charges. You have to pay to submit in order to make things open access. What Diamond Open Access says is no. Building a structure and maintaining that structure around science and sharing scientific research and other types of research should be done in the public good, should be done efficiently and effectively with quality. But that can be done by the universities of the world and by nonprofits of the world, where profit is not the primary motivation, because that's not what science should be about. That's not what education should be about. These should be things that serve and mechanisms that serve the public good. And so it's a very different way of thinking about it. Creative Commons is very fond of Diamond Open Access.
Abel, I'm going to have to shut off the recording, but we can all stay here a little bit longer and keep talking, okay?
That sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah, let me stop the recording, okay?